Liberal flight attendant kicks John Kennedy. Off plane, minutes later, the airline collapses. John Neely Kennedy, a prominent United States senator from Louisiana and a key figure in the Republican Party, boarded the United Airlines flight with a quiet confidence that drew a few curious glances. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, his tie perfectly knotted, he carried a leather briefcase in one hand and his boarding pass in the other. His demeanor was serene, his steps measured as he walked down the aisle, glancing at seat numbers. The faint hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, and passengers settled in some casting furtive looks at the senator. Kennedy offered a courteous nod to the person seated next to his assigned first-class seat, stowed his briefcase in the overhead bin, and sat down. He pulled out a small notebook, opened it to jot down some thoughts, his focus undisturbed by the bustle around him. Moments later, Jessica Reed, a flight attendant with a crisp uniform and a sharp gaze, moved swiftly through the cabin. Known among her colleagues for her openly expressed liberal views, Jessica often shared criticisms of conservative figures on her personal social media. As her eyes scanned the first-class section, they locked onto Kennedy. Her steps faltered, her expression hardened. She recognized him instantly, not just as a passenger but as a political figure whose stances clashed with her own. Her jaw clenched, a flash of disdain crossed her face. Without hesitation, she approached his seat, her tone polite but tinged with cutting coldness. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice steady but icy. "May I see your boarding pass?" Kennedy looked up, his brow slightly furrowed, but his composure remained intact. "Of course," he replied, handing over the pass with a faint smile. Jessica took it, her fingers brushing the paper as she examined it quickly. Her frown deepened as if Kennedy's presence in first class were a personal affront. "This is a first-class ticket, correct?" she asked, her tone skeptical, almost defiant. Kennedy nodded, his voice calm. "That's right." Jessica hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line. She returned the pass without a word, her eyes lingering on him for a moment before turning and walking away. But her rigid posture and the way her hands fidgeted betrayed her irritation. Clearly, she wasn't done. In the galley, Jessica exchanged whispered words with another attendant, David, an experienced crew member with a knack for reading situations. "That's John Kennedy in 3A, she muttered, her voice low but sharp. "I don't think he belongs here." David raised an eyebrow, sensing trouble. "Belongs? He's got a ticket, Jess. Let it go." But Jessica shook her head, her resolve hardening. She didn't like Kennedy's politics, and for her, that was reason enough. She adjusted her uniform, took a deep breath, and marched back to Kennedy's seat, this time with an air of authority. "Senator Kennedy," she said, her voice now louder, drawing a few curious glances from nearby passengers. "I need you to step aside for a moment. There's an issue with your booking." Kennedy's eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained calm. He stood, grabbed his briefcase, and followed Jessica to the galley, his expression unreadable. The cabin buzzed with whispers as first-class passengers exchanged looks, sensing something unusual. In the cramped galley space, Jessica crossed her arms, her tone colder now. "There's been a mix-up with your seat. I'll have to ask you to move to economy." Kennedy tilted his head, his voice steady but firm. "A mix-up. I booked this seat weeks ago and it was confirmed. Could you check again?" Jessica's eyes flashed with defiance. "I've checked," she snapped, her professionalism slipping. "I don't think this seat is appropriate for you. You need to move to economy, or I'll call security." For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed Kennedy's face, but he quickly masked it. He had faced tougher opponents in the Senate than a flight attendant with a grudge. "I see," he said simply, his tone measured. "If that's your decision, I'll comply." He returned to his seat, gathered his belongings, and followed Jessica to the economy section, ignoring the curious stares of other passengers. Jessica pointed to a cramped middle seat near the back. Kennedy stowed his briefcase and sat down without a word, his posture still upright, his expression impassive. Jessica offered a curt, "Thank you for your cooperation," before turning away, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. She thought she had won. But Kennedy wasn't one to let things slide. As the plane taxied to the runway, he pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. He typed a brief message to his team: "Incident on United flight. Discriminatory treatment. Prepare to act." He hit send, a subtle glint in his eyes. The engines roared, but they couldn't drown out the tension brewing in the cabin. Some passengers cast sympathetic glances at Kennedy, while others avoided eye contact, sensing the weight of the situation. In first class, Jessica resumed her duties with a renewed sense of control, attending to passengers and serving drinks with practiced ease. But David, watching from the galley, shook his head. "You're playing with fire, Jess," he muttered to himself. "That's not just any passenger." Kennedy, now seated in economy, remained calm, his focus shifting to his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, making a discreet call. "It's me," he said, his voice low but firm. "I've been moved to economy for no valid reason. I want this handled quietly, but effectively. Wait for my signal." He ended the call, stowing his phone as the plane leveled off. His outward calm masked a mind already calculating his next move. Across the aisle, a young flight attendant named Emily, with a warm demeanor, approached him. "Sir, is everything okay?" she asked softly, sensing the tension. Kennedy offered a polite smile. "Just a minor issue, thank you. I'm fine." Emily hesitated, then nodded, placing a glass of water on his tray before moving on. Her kindness stood in stark contrast to Jessica's hostility, and Kennedy noted it. As the flight continued, Jessica's confidence began to waver. Kennedy's unshakable calm unnerved her, though she couldn't pinpoint why. She kept busy serving drinks and checking seatbelts, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the senator. Had she misjudged him? She pushed the doubt aside, convincing herself she had done the right thing. But in the galley, David's words lingered. "I hope this doesn't blow up," he said, his tone serious. "People like him don't let things go easily." Jessica brushed it off, but a seed of unease began to take root. Meanwhile, Kennedy gazed out the window, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. He wasn't angry. He was strategic. Whatever came next, he was ready. The intercom crackled, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us today. We're cruising smoothly and expect to land on time." Kennedy's gaze flicked forward, his face betraying no emotion. He opened his notebook, jotted a single line, "Accountability starts now," and closed it with a decisive snap. The cabin settled into a quiet rhythm, but the tension between Jessica and Kennedy was palpable. Jessica, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued her duties, her initial triumph fading into a nagging doubt. Kennedy, on the other hand, was already 3 steps ahead, his plan unfolding with precision. The flight was halfway through cruising at 30,000 feet when John Neely Kennedy's phone buzzed discreetly on his lap. The senator, seated in his cramped economy class seat, glanced at the screen, his expression as serene as ever. A message from his team appeared, post-ready. "Awaiting your approval." Kennedy, with the precision of an experienced strategist, responded swiftly. "Go." He leaned back in his seat, his outward calm concealing the storm he was about to unleash. Within minutes, his post on X went live, a concise but powerful account of his experience discriminated against on United Airlines flight. Moved from first class to economy, for no reason other than political bias. This isn't just about me, it's about fairness. Boycott United. The post included a photo of his tight economy seat, a stark contrast to the luxury of first class. Within seconds, the message began to spread like wildfire, igniting a digital fury that no one on the plane, not even Jessica Reed, could foresee. In the galley, Jessica continued her duties, oblivious to the whirlwind forming in the virtual world. She poured coffee for a first-class passenger, her movements mechanical, her mind still replaying her confrontation with Kennedy. Each time she recalled the senator's unshakable calm, a pang of unease ran through her, though she tried hard to ignore it. David, the veteran flight attendant, noticed her distraction and took a brief break to check his phone. His eyes widened as he saw Kennedy's post already amassing thousands of likes and retweets. "Jess," he said, urgently approaching her with the phone in hand. "You need to see this." He showed her the screen where the senator's message stood as a public accusation. Jessica's face paled, her lips pressed together. "He's just exaggerating," she murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. David shook his head, his tone grave. "This isn't just a complaint, Jess. It's a senator with millions of followers. You've just stirred up a huge problem." The cabin remained calm, with passengers absorbed in their books, movies, or trivial conversations, but the digital world was erupting. Kennedy's post had caught the attention of conservative influencers, political commentators, and ordinary citizens frustrated with what they perceived as corporate overreach. Hashtags like #BoycottUnited and #UnitedDiscriminates became global trends within minutes. Prominent figures, including some allied with the Republican Party, amplified the message. And a high-profile tweet from a major political figure, many speculated it was President Trump himself, added fuel to the fire. United Airlines disrespects our great Senator Kennedy. Time to show them what happens when you mess with patriots. #BoycottUnited. That tweet was retweeted millions of times, and United's stocks began to plummet as investors panicked. The airline, which just hours earlier had been operating normally, now faced an existential crisis, all triggered by one flight attendant's impulsive decision. On the plane, Jessica's unease grew with each passing minute. The galley, a space that normally felt familiar and controlled, now seemed claustrophobic. She tried to focus on her tasks, checking seat belts and responding to passenger requests, but her mind was elsewhere. David's comment echoed in her head, and the possibility that her action could have consequences beyond this flight began to take shape. Suddenly, the galley phone rang, breaking the silence. Jessica picked it up with a trembling hand. "This is Jessica," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. A stern voice from United Airlines operations team responded on the other end. "We've received a complaint about an incident involving Senator John Kennedy. Submit a detailed report upon landing. Ensure no further disruptions." Jessica's heart sank. "Yes, of course," she stammered, hanging up the phone with shaking hands. David, who had been watching from the corner, looked at her with a mix of sympathy and disapproval. "I told you," he said quietly. "This is bigger than you thought." Jessica tried to resume her duties, but her hands trembled as she poured drinks, spilling a few drops of juice onto a tray. She wiped them up quickly, her mind racing. How had this escalated so fast? What had she done? In the economy section, Kennedy remained a rock amidst the storm he had unleashed. He sipped the water. Emily, the kind flight attendant, had given him, occasionally checking his phone as notifications flooded in. His team kept him updated with brief, precise messages. Stocks down 5%. customers canceling flights, United's PR team in chaos. Kennedy didn't smile, but a quiet satisfaction settled over him. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking accountability. His goal wasn't just to rectify a personal injustice, but to expose a system that allowed such biases to flourish unchecked. Across the aisle, a passenger, a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap, leaned toward him and whispered, "That flight attendant really messed with the wrong guy, huh?" Kennedy met his gaze, his tone calm but firm. "It's not about me. It's about doing what's right." The passenger nodded, impressed by the senator's restraint, and didn't press further. As the plane began its descent, the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare your belongings for disembarkation." Jessica's stomach twisted as she performed final checks, her forced smile barely holding. She avoided looking toward the economy section, but she could feel Kennedy's presence, his calm radiating like a silent warning. When the plane touched down smoothly, passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and began gathering their bags. But an undercurrent of tension lingered in the cabin. Kennedy remained seated, typing a final message to his team. "Landed. Keep the pressure on." He stowed his phone, his expression unreadable as passengers started to exit. Jessica positioned herself near the exit, forcing a smile for each person passing by. Her heart pounded as she waited for Kennedy. He didn't rush, waiting until the aisle was nearly clear before standing. He gathered his briefcase with the same precise calm he had maintained throughout the flight and walked toward the exit. As he approached, Jessica tried to hold his gaze. "Thank you for flying with United, Senator," she said, her voice trembling. Kennedy paused, his eyes piercing but serene. "I'm sure we'll be speaking again," he replied softly, his tone carrying a weight that made her shudder. Without another word, he stepped off the plane, leaving Jessica rooted in place, as if the ground beneath her feet had vanished. Barely moments later, 2 security officers boarded the plane, their presence eliciting gasps from the remaining crew. "Jessica Reed," one of them asked, his tone firm. Jessica held her breath. "Yes," she whispered. "We need you to come with us. There are questions about an incident on this flight." Her face drained of color, and the officers escorted her off the plane, her steps rigid with panic. David watched in silence, his expression a mix of compassion and reproach. He said nothing, but his eyes told a story of warnings ignored. Outside the terminal, Kennedy stood near the gate, phone in hand, observing the chaos unfolding on X. His team reported that United's stocks had fallen 10% in the last hour, and customers were flooding the airline's customer service lines with cancellations. The crisis was in full swing, and the impact of Kennedy's post reverberated far beyond the airport. He turned, walking toward the baggage claim area with steady strides, his plan in full execution. In the airport's security holding area, Jessica sat in a stark room, her hands tightly clasped on the table. The officers were professional, but relentless. "Miss Reed," one began, "we've been informed of an incident involving Senator John Kennedy. United Airlines management has requested a full report. Are you aware of his position?" Jessica's heart sank further. "I didn't know at first," she admitted, her voice barely audible. The officer leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Senator Kennedy is a high-profile figure with significant influence. His complaint has reached the highest levels, and they're treating this as a serious case of discrimination." Jessica's hands trembled as she tried to process the words. I thought he didn't belong in first class," she stammered, her words sounding hollow even to herself. The officer's gaze hardened. "Your actions have put United in a precarious position. You'll need to explain yourself fully." The reality of her situation began to crush her, and for the first time Jessica felt the true weight of what she had triggered. Meanwhile, Kennedy stood at the baggage claim, his phone pressed to his ear. "Ensure the team has all the footage and statements," he said calmly. "This isn't just about one flight attendant. It's about a system that allows this kind of bias. I want change." He hung up, retrieving his suitcase from the conveyor belt with ease. Around him, some passengers from the flight recognized him, some nodding in respect, others whispering among themselves. Kennedy moved through the terminal with purpose, his calm demeanor concealing the seismic shift he had set in motion. United Airlines was reeling, and the consequences of Jessica's actions were only beginning to unfold. The outside world, now aware of the incident thanks to X's virality, demanded answers, and Kennedy was determined to ensure those answers led to real transformation. The days following the flight transformed United Airlines into an epicenter of chaos. The boycott wave, driven by millions of users on X, had sunk the airline's stocks by more than 20% in just 48 hours. Customers canceled flights en masse, and hashtags boycott, United, and #United discriminates dominated global trends. Conservative media and political leaders amplified the outrage, turning the incident into a symbol of corporate bias. United's management, desperate to contain the damage, issued a public apology and announced immediate policy reviews, but the pressure led by Senator John Neely Kennedy and his supporters was relentless. This was not just a public relations crisis, it was a reckoning that forced the airline to confront its systemic failures. Jessica Reed, now unemployed, sat in her small apartment with the termination notice from United Airlines glaring at her from the table like an unrelenting reminder of her mistake. The disciplinary hearing had been merciless. Executives grilled her on every detail, dismantling her excuses with incisive questions. "You moved a United States senator based on a hunch," one had asked, incredulous. Jessica had no answer. Her career, built through years of dedication, had crumbled in an instant. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and former colleagues. Some offered solace, others judgment. She turned on the television, seeking distraction, but a news segment caught her attention. It was Kennedy speaking at a press conference, his voice firm yet measured. "This isn't about personal vendettas," he said. "It's about ensuring no one is treated unfairly because of their beliefs. United Airlines must do better." Jessica's chest tightened. For the first time, she saw Kennedy not as an adversary, but as someone with every right to demand accountability. His words resonated, forcing her to face the magnitude of her error. She hadn't just wronged Kennedy. She had betrayed the values of fairness she once thought she upheld. Meanwhile, Kennedy was in Washington, D.C., in an elegant boardroom facing United Airlines CEO Margaret Larson. The airline, teetering on the brink of financial collapse, had requested the meeting as a desperate attempt to mitigate the damage. Larson, her face tense but professional, began. "Senator Kennedy, we deeply regret what happened. We are committed to making it right." Kennedy leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "An apology is a start, but it's not enough. This wasn't just one employee's mistake. It's a culture that allowed her to act on bias. I want concrete changes, mandatory anti-bias training, transparent reporting, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination." Larson nodded, taking notes quickly. "We're already implementing training and reviewing our policies. We'll provide regular updates." Kennedy's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "Good. This isn't about punishment. It's about progress." As he left the meeting, Kennedy felt a mix of relief and determination. He knew true change required time, but he had planted a seed that could transform not only United, but the entire industry. In her apartment, Jessica grappled with her new reality. She had always trusted her instincts, but now she saw how they had betrayed her. She opened her laptop, hesitating before typing an email to United's Human Resources Department. It wasn't a defense, it was a heartfelt apology. To Senator Kennedy and United Airlines, she wrote, "I acted based on assumptions, and I was wrong. My behavior was unprofessional and harmful. I am committed to learning from this and ensuring it never happens again." She pressed send, feeling a small relief in her chest. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a step toward accountability. Days later, she decided to take a bolder step. She applied for a position at a nonprofit dedicated to promoting workplace diversity. In her interview, she was brutally honest. "I made a mistake that cost me my career, but it taught me the danger of bias. I want to help others avoid that path." Her sincerity impressed the interviewers, and she got the job a modest but meaningful opportunity to rebuild her life. It wasn't an easy path, but it gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Weeks later, Kennedy's team forwarded him Jessica's email. He read it carefully, noting the genuine tone of her words. He wasn't one for grudges. His fight was for systemic change, not personal retribution. He replied briefly, "Thank you for your apology. Accountability is the first step. I hope you use this experience to grow and contribute positively." He sent the message and reviewed a report from United. The airline had implemented anti-bias training for all staff and created a passenger feedback system to catch issues early. Customer trust was slowly returning, and the boycott's intensity had eased. Kennedy allowed a slight satisfaction to wash over him, not for the airline's suffering, but for the change it had sparked. His phone buzzed with a message from a Senate colleague praising him for turning a personal slight into a broader cause. Kennedy smiled faintly, but his mind was already on the future, planning how to maintain pressure to ensure the reforms were lasting. Months later, Kennedy boarded another United flight for a work trip. The staff greeted him warmly, their professionalism noticeably improved. "Welcome back, Senator," a gate agent said, offering a genuine smile. Kennedy nodded, settling into an economy-class seat by choice, a subtle nod to his principles. He noticed a flight attendant helping a passenger with a heavy suitcase, her tone kind and patient. It reminded him of Emily, the attendant who had shown him kindness during the incident. Kennedy had written a letter commending her, and she had since been promoted to a training role. Small gestures, he knew, could create far-reaching ripples. As the plane took off, Kennedy opened his notebook and wrote a single line. "Change is hard won, but worth it." He closed the notebook, gazing out at the clouds through the window. The incident had been a flashpoint, but its impact went beyond one flight or one airline. It had sparked conversations about fairness bias and the power of social media to hold institutions accountable. Meanwhile, Jessica was beginning to find her place at the nonprofit. Her talks at workshops, where she shared her story as a cautionary tale about bias, were humbling but impactful. Each presentation was a reminder of her mistake, but also of her commitment to change. One afternoon, while preparing a session, she received an email from a former United colleague. "I saw the news about the new trainings," it read. "They say it's because of what happened with you and the senator. You made a mess, but you also helped make things better." Jessica read the message several times, a mix of guilt and hope in her heart. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. This story is a powerful reminder of the dangers of acting on bias in a polarized world. Jessica's impulsive decision, driven by political differences, cost her career and nearly destroyed an airline. But it also demonstrates the power of accountability and redemption. Kennedy's strategic response transformed a personal slight into a catalyst for systemic change, showing that adversity can be a force for good if handled with purpose. For listeners, especially younger generations navigating the digital age, the lesson is clear. Check your biases before you act, and use tools like X responsibly. A moment of impulsiveness can destroy, but a commitment to growth can rebuild. In a society quick to judge, choose fairness over division, because one misstep can change everything, but one right step can change it for the better. Thank you for following this journey of accountability and change. Subscribe for more stories that show how one person can make a difference.